Hi, so this project will be implementation of face detection app on Streamlit. So let's move forward. Now face detection, also called facial detection, is an artificial intelligence based computer technology used to find and identify human faces in digital images or video settings. Now face detection technology can be applied to various fields that may be security, biometrics, law enforcement, etc. There's a subdomain in face detection, that is face analysis, where we help identify which part of an image or maybe video should be focused on to determine age, gender, emotions, etc. Now, details about this project. So, first, we will understand why we are using Streamlit and how to use Streamlit. Next, we will be using a HAR cascade classifier to do our face detection. So let's move forward. So Streamlit. Streamlit is an awesome new tool that is actually used for web development, but not exactly. Here you can see it is used to quickly build highly interactive web applications about their data, machine learning models, and pretty much anything. But usually it is more centered around data and machine learning models itself. Now, the best thing that Streamlit has is that you don't actually need to have a, you know, web development. You don't need to have a web development experience beforehand to use Streamlit. If you know Python, you're good to go. Now, face detection app. For face detection app, there are many ways to implement this and various situations also. You could build a model from scratch and train a lot of images that have faces, or you could use a pre-trained model and work on images. Now, what we are going to do is actually going to use a pre-trained model where we will be using our HAR cascade classifier that are based on machine learning approach. So once we move forward in face detection app, I would make you understand what HAR cascade classifier is, how did it trained, where did it come from, and how to use it. Thank you. So this is the first part where we understand what is Streamlit and use some of the features that it provides. Now before we go on to the code and see what it outputs, let's first understand what is Streamlit. So it is an app framework specifically for machine learning and data science teams. You can rapidly build the tools you need, build apps in a dozen lines of Python code, or build a simple API itself. Now, Streamlit is a tool in the machine learning tools category of a tech stack. Streamlit is an open source tool which has a lot of attention from a lot of data science people. Since here it is not that you can just build a simple web application, you can portray or you can do EDA, maybe feature engineering, and each of that can actually be visualized using Streamlit and into a very beautiful visualization. So Streamlit has a lot of features, and some of the most important ones, or maybe the some of the most characteristics ones, sorry, are free and open source. So Streamlit is actually an open source. You can go to their docs, maybe go to the GitHub account and see. Now they build apps in dozen line of code with a simple API. There's no callbacks, no hidden state, and finally works with TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, Pandas, NumPy, Matplotlib, Seaborn, maybe Altair, Plotly, and many more packages. So this is the what I should say. This is the most easiest way if you want to build a web application without knowing much knowledge about web application or web development. Though it has some limitations which I would showcase you. But before going to that, let's first see the interface of Streamlit. I have called Streamlit and I have called components package under Streamlit, which I will tell you why I have. So once you build a simple web application, once you simply build a Streamlit code, you write Streamlit, run, and then the name of the app or the code.py. Then you would be given this page, and you can see that this is a very, coffee smooth page. And then you can go through, scroll down, scroll back up. Now you can see there's some more options here. There's settings. So you can go to the settings, change the theme, maybe dark. So it's good. And maybe you can just set it as user system settings. Since mine is dark, so it is showing you dark itself. And not only that, you can even go to active themes and you can edit the primary color and go and change the color here. Go for background color, change the background color and stuff like that. And then you can see that there is a font family too, but it only gives you three options. And yeah. So now another thing that is very cool about Streamlit is that once you change your code here, maybe you write something. Okay, yeah, this is gibberish, but if you write something to change the code or maybe enhance the code, now Streamlit is able to understand that yeah, the code was changed, and you can see that there is an option here, I option, which says that source file has changed, and it asks you to rerun. So after rerun, what it does is it accepts the changes and makes the suitable changes on the code or in the interface itself. Now you can see that there's the rerun option, clear cache option, and in the settings, there's a run on save option, which basically is telling you that once you change your code and save the code, so this Streamlit basically reruns itself. You don't have to go again and again and rerun from here. So this is a basic description of Streamlit. And one thing to make sure is that you must have installed Python 3.6 or some version that is above that, because Streamlit runs on Python 3.6 and above. So you can see that there's some variables that I've defined, and you can see that there's some select option too. So just like I told you about, there's one major, I won't say major, but there's one drawback about using Streamlit, and that is, say I'm actually choosing boring. So see, it is running and the code runs. The problem is that the whole code runs, or I should say reruns, and each and every process that I defined in my Streamlit, Python 5, each of every process is, done again and again. So you can see that it's taking a lot of time, and now you can see that, yeah, the output is shown here. Now you can simply do this for, yeah, let's say I'm talking about having the details of the person. Now I'm Siddharth, my age is 21. So I type in my name, okay, and I press enter. Now see, it starts rerunning again. So the problem is here is, if there was a form, okay, which is accepting my basic details like age, name, where I live, how old I am, if I am going to some university or something, if I have work experience or not. So I would input just my name and it starts to rerun again. Now if I have to input my age and I go for 21, now it starts to rerun again, and then I would wait for it to rerun. Then I would input my next, let's say, where I live. So it takes a lot of time to just fill one form. And this, I think, is a little drawback of Streamlit. But again, as I told you, this is not a, what should I say, pre-built web application which handles everything. This is mostly for visualization and showcasing your data or about your data. So let's close that. Now, actually, before closing this, you can see that now my name is shown here and age is shown here. And I would tell you how to build this. So let's go back to the code. And yeah, so first thing that we have is a title, that is streamlit.title. So title basically gives you a header. Okay, not maybe a header. This is basically your code for this. So this is giving you a title. This is for your header. So you can see that one is bold and has a bigger font value, font size, and one is smaller, not having any bold characteristic. And next thing you can see is components.html. So I did call components. So actually components is used to inject HTML code inside my Streamlit. So you can see that I've injected the HTML code here and I've defined the width and height. So it builds a box and inside that it injects the HTML code. So you can see that I've just written Streamlit is this and I've given this a H3 font and with a body. And as you can go back and see, this is giving me a very, what should I say, a small font size. H3 is actually small. And with that, a bold value, the text is in bold. Let's go back to the code. I'm going to switch back and again, to and fro with the code and the interface because each and every function that I'm going to use from my Streamlit has very different characteristics as compared to each other. And for different situations or maybe requirements, you might be using different functions itself. So the most used function would be your Streamlit.write function. So the write function is like the basic and most, what should I say, the most used function that you would be using because if you want to write anything on your Streamlit app or on into the interface, you would be using write function. Now write function has the smallest font value, doesn't have any italics, doesn't have any bold, simple writing, and this can be used like say I want to, I have defined a topic, I have defined a subtopic, and now I want to explain my subtopic. I'm using dot write function, and inside that I'm just writing whatever I want to portray on the Streamlit interface itself. Again, back to the code. You can see that here I'm using the next function that is sidebar dot subheader. So sidebar is by this sidebar here and subheader is defining this. So inside sidebar, you can use header, subheader, write function. Now this is a range category function, which is actually your slider function here. So then use your slider function. Again, one thing to notice is that I've used another function named markdown. Now, just like I told you about components where I'm injecting the HTML code, I can inject the HTML code using markdown function also. But why I haven't used this or why I have showcased you HTML components.html is because markdown is actually going to be depreciated as the Streamlit gets more updated, coming with new versions. So I just included markdown also because it was in heavy use before components.html came into the picture. Now you can see that again I'm using my write function. So here I'm just inputting the name and then the actual name that I'm storing in T2 variable from my text input function. Now there are some other functions also which I haven't used here because I just couldn't, stuff those functions here. So those functions are map function, radio function, checkbox function, pyplot function, and image function. So just as I said, now let's start with the first function, that is st.map. Now st.map is a function which is used to plot maps on your interface. Yeah, like you can actually plot maps on the web page by maybe highlighting the cities inside the map or maybe the places that you want to highlight it. And it gives you a lot more options where you can even scroll up and down to zoom in into the map and zoom out of the map and stuff like that. And coming to the next function, that is st.radio. So this is like creating radio buttons for, maybe implementing a form, maybe implementing a rating, maybe going from 0 to 5, and you have implemented a radio button for each of the rating, and you want the user to input maybe, let's say, a rating of 4, 3. So for stuff like that, you can use radio. Now again, checkbox. It is pretty clear from the name itself what radio and checkbox are about. So you can just giving the input maybe in a form of dictionary or maybe in a form of list for the radio and checkbox, and it definitely builds you a radio button with all the options as the values in the list. The next is st.pyplot. Now, just as I told you about that most data scientists, I would say, would use Streamlit for actually visualizing their data. So pyplot actually helps a lot in that. The next is images, st.images. Again, you can even embed images into your interface by just defining maybe a name for the image and where to pick the image from. It can be from a URL or maybe a path on your local server or local project, I would say. So it can be both online and offline. Now with this, we come to the end for the first part where I was explaining about Streamlit and maybe using some of the functions to showcase how Streamlit actually helps in visualizing what functions Streamlit actually has and how to use them. Now, this is the second part where we will actually understand how did we build our detection of faces model, or I should say face detection app, and what all did we use to build that. Now, in the intro, I told you about there may be a model that we build and train, and there might be a model that is already pre-trained and we use that. So we will be going with the later part, and that is where Har Cascade comes in. Now, Har Cascade is basically a machine learning based approach where a cascade function is trained from a lot of images, both positive and negative classes, where I would mean that let's say we are trying to classify images where it has faces in it. So a positive class image would be where it already has an face. And a negative class would be where an image is there where there is no faces present inside the image. Now based on its training, it is then used to detect the object in other images. So how this works is they are actually a very huge individual .xml files with a lot of feature sets, and each XML file corresponds to a very specific type of use case. And we will be actually exploiting this. Now, as I've already given a simple description and where this Har cascading came from and who proposed this was Paul Voila and Michael Jones in their paper Rapid Object Detection Using a Boosted Cascade of Simple Features. Now, you can see that I have again injected an HTML code inside my Streamlit, so it shows on the interface, and there you can see that if you go to this link, you can see that this is an actually OpenCV repo where you can see a lot of XML files, and if you look carefully you can see there's a Har cascade eye, or cascade eye or eyeglasses, frontal cat face, alternative I would think, and full body, left eye, two splits, license plate, lower body, profile face, and there are so many of other XML files. So you can directly use this XML file to detect whatever this is specifying. A full body, then it means you would be able to detect a full body in an image. If there's a license plate, that means you would be able to identify license plate in the image, and so on. You can use them in your other projects also. So moving forward, we will start with how to build a face detection app. So we will be using the cascade classifier, which is present in my CV2, which I had imported inside my code. Yeah, you can see there from my open CV. And next would be our cascade classifier multi-detect. Oh, yeah. So we have two functions here, which are very important if we are going to use a pre-built model for our face detection app. So first is load function, which is inside cascade classifier, where we are going to load a .xml classifier file. And now this can be either a har or an LBP classifier. Next, we would go for detect multiscale function, which kind of, what should I say, performs pre-processing on the image so that we can set the image into a form where we can use the XML classifier file. So I've defined some steps which ranges from step 1, 2, 3, okay, 4, oh, sorry, 5. So if we follow these steps, we are able to build a basic face detection app using our pre-trained XML file. Now first, we use the cascade classifier function to point to the location where we have stored the XML file. So basically now we will be using our load function from our cascade classifier and load the XML file to my code itself. So you can see I have done this here. Next is step 2, where we load the frames and convert it into grayscale. Okay. Now one thing to understand is that first of all, we are trying to capture a video. Yeah, we're not actually capturing our image and then just inputting the image. We are actually doing that, but from the aspect of the user, we are just taking a video. And I will show you the result of this, the output of this at the end of this video itself. Okay. So what we are doing is we are asking the, let's say, the computer to take a video, and inside that video we are trying to find if the video stream has a face or not. But again, the XML file was actually trained on positive and negative classes, but for images, not for video. So what we are trying to do is that for each, let's say for the video itself, we are trying to cut it into frames, and those frames are actually images. Now it won't be like, very clear just from me telling you. Once you are able to see how the output is, maybe it might be a little more clear. So let's move forward with this. Now, just like I said before, we have to input the images into a format which is the same as the XML file has. For example, machine learning model can't take strings as input, right? Similarly, XML file having been processed and trained on images that are in gray and black format, yeah, grayscale I would say, can't be trained or can't be used on an image that has color in it. So first we convert our image, which I'm calling here frame, into my gray format. Now, so when OpenCV reads the RGB image, it usually stores the image in BGR, that is blue, green, red. So first of course, the image is not like saved as an image itself, but as a set of array having these three values for each pixel. Okay, it ranges from 0 to 255, and again for each pixel, so there can be a lot of pixels, so there can be a lot of small arrays inside an array. That is defining my image. So it is in the format of blue, green, and red. But for the purpose of image recognition, we need to convert this into BGR format. And then we can convert it into a gray channel, or the grayscale I was talking about. So the reason that this is gray channel, or we are actually using gray channel, is because it is computationally less expensive or intensive, I would say, as it contains only one channel of black and white. Now we are working with three small, I would say, we would be working with blue, green, and red, three values for one pixel. But if it is in grayscale or in gray format, I would be working with two values representing white and black. So first I'm taking my video, okay, capturing it as frames that are basically cutting it down into images, then sending each image and converting it into my gray, what should I say, gray set, grayscale, whatever goes. Yeah, then the next step is step 3. So now after converting the image from RGB to gray, we will now try to locate the exact features in our face. So since I'm assuming, let's say, that the video has face, meaning for all the images that I have now created, each one of the image would have a face in it. So now we can use this image to determine if it actually has a face or not. Meaning if we are actually defining or having our face detection app run on images. So we will now try to locate the exact features, and for that I'm using the face cascade class, and inside that my detect multi-scale function. So you can see it is actually taking 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters. One is gray, which we had defined here. So this gray is actually my image now in gray, meaning black and white format. And the next is scale factor, min neighbors, and min size. Now you must be wondering what all these are. Now I'm going to specify each one of them one by one. Now scale factor, the second parameter. Your model has a fixed size defined during training, which is our XML file already must have a fixed size of images, number of pixels for the image, and it must have been trained on those itself, and which is what I'm talking about now. This means that this size of the face is detected in image if present. However, using rescaling on the input image, that is my gray, we can convert a larger face to a smaller one, making it detectable by the algorithm, and vice versa. Meaning, if I have a value of 1.1, that means I'm enlarging the face if it is present in my gray image, or in this gray, which is our image, and I'm asking it to zoom in by 110%. Because the XML file had a specific size for faces in images, if my image now that I have, that is gray, has a face but is not the same size as my XML file, then it might happen that the detect multi-scale, or that my face detection app won't work properly and actually think that this face is not present, and would say that yeah, in this image the face is not present. But if I exemplify the face, or if I change or zoom in into the face, and the size becomes the same as the XML file, then it would be able to showcase, yeah, a face is present and it would be able to detect the face. So that's why we use the scale factor parameter. Next is min neighbor. So min neighbor parameter specifies how many neighbors each candidate rectangle, meaning each face, if it is detected in the image, can or should have to retain it. This parameter will affect the quality of detected faces. Now a higher value results in lower detection rate, and a value of 3 to 6 is a good value for this. Meaning, let's say I have five faces in my video at any point. So one image will be created for that point having five faces. But if these five faces are very much closely, attached to each other, or maybe there is not much space between each of the faces, then it might happen that the face detection app would only be able to recognize two faces that are far apart, or maybe three faces that are far apart. So if you specify a min neighbors, so it basically defines how far apart two objects must be so that this app is able to work on both the objects and identify if those both objects are actually faces or not. Okay, so the last is min size, again, which is telling you that a minimum of this size of rectangle can be formed in which an face can be detected. Now this rectangle size face again would be a little more bit clear once I run this code. Actually, you know what? Let me just show you. Yeah, at the end I would show you uh, how to run this and what those rectangles, face, object, size actually are. Now we are actually using this multi-detect, which is already an inbuilt function inside my face cascade. Now this function will help us in finding the features. Okay, and the way it does is it will use all the features from the face cascade object to detect the features of the new image using my parameters, all of these parameters and my image which is present inside gray. Okay, yeah, so I've already defined them in much detail. These are like just the overview of each of the parameters. And then we go on to the step 4. So in the above step, the function detect multi-scale returns four values actually, which are x coordinate, y coordinate of my object if it is a face, with width and height of the rectangle inside which a face was able to be detected. Based on these four values, we will draw a rectangle around the face. So you can see, oh, okay. For visualization purpose, I was actually telling you about rectangle and all. Though rectangles are not really found, we have to actually build them. This width and height actually tells you about the rectangle, but it is not actually shown when you are running your app unless you have implemented step 4. So in step 4, we are building the rectangle using the input that we had from our detect multi-scale. So using the CV2 rectangle function, in which I am providing my frame, that is basically my image, and then the x and y coordinate, and again the size and where the rectangle would be present inside the image. This is basically telling you that the image having a rectangle, if a face is present, so the rectangle would be made out of a color of green, BGR. Okay, so 255 means that this color is green, pure green. So last is step 5. Okay, so once the app is running, unless you kill the process, it won't stop. But killing the process is like kind of a crude way to do things. So we are implementing a input queue function, not even a function. Basically, we are trying to ask the user to input queue if he or she wants to stop the function and release and delete all the video that has been taken till now. Now you can see that the last thing to go for is you can just click on here, can I detect your face? And once you do, now should I do that? Yeah, okay, go with it. So once I do, it would run the app again. And after running, you can see that my webcam is on and I can go to, okay, yeah, before going to anywhere, you must see that there's actually a Python code running, okay, and it's showing me, and you can see if I input this, it is actually able to see all of these faces also. Now it's not taking my face, and now it's taking my face. So you can run this. See, it's not even closing if I close this. But if I input Q, it would close. So with this, we have completed a basic, face detection app. And you can see that Streamlit is actually very helpful as I can just, read the lines that I wanted to actually tell you about. Even put in another URL to go to some other page for more information, can specify some of the code inside the interface itself to tell you what that code is working on or working about, can put in points to simplify or maybe a very specific or very complex task, and that way you can see that Streamlit is actually very helpful if you want to visualize things. Now turning back to the code, before we go forward, you can see that this har cascade frontal face default XML is the file that I was using, and you can just download this from the URL that I had set inside the Streamlit, or you can maybe go for this link here. This will give you even more detailed information about our cascade and how it works, because here I didn't actually tell you much about how the pre-processing of images were done. We were just simplifying our video into a frame that are actually images itself and then using those images. Now you can see that CV2 video capture is the function I was using for capturing the video, and from there, if we scroll down, yeah, you can see here that if video capture was opened, then you can read all of that video and convert it into the frames by images, use the images, convert the image into gray, give the grayscale image to my detect multiscale with the other parameters set up. You can change the values here to see how it is working. My rectangle is formed here. As you could see in the image capturing video, that green rectangle had been made around all the faces that it was able to detect. Okay, yeah, with this we can wrap the face detection app. And lastly, I would like to, yeah, last thing before we wrap up is telling you about interior. So yeah, so interior is actually a predefined value for the number of faces that might be in an image, and it is checking how many faces are actually present in the image itself. So here it is defining, yeah, let's say the image actually had 6 faces, so 6 would be inputted in this, And then I'm just logging it into my webcam.log, where I'm telling you this number of images were present at this second in this frame. So if I open my webcam.log, you can see a lot of input, your logs have been put, and you can see two faces were there at this date at this time, and you could see two faces were there, three faces were there, four faces were there, and so on. So this is the last part, and this is all which encompassed both Streamlit and face detection app. If you want just the code for the face detection app, it is inside webcam CV3. You can access the code from here. And lastly, if you are little more curious about cascading and face detection apps, or how you have to actually use Streamlit, you can go to both of these URLs and learn more about from there.